there any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric? From feedback to learner autonomy, we'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
Hi, I'm Matthew.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Matt.
And welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters, presented by three self-certified TEFLologists.
TEFL pioneers.
So these days, reflection, as Thomas Farrell put it, is an educational paradigm supported in teacher and learner development and educational programs. However, are you familiar with who conceptualized this idea of reflection?
This particular idea of reflection?
This particular idea. I mean, I guess there's many applicable kind of paradigms of reflection, but the one that I'm going to be talking about today.
Yes.
No, I don't.
Okay, well, Rob does. Okay, so I'm going to be talking to you about John Dewey. John Dewey, and
That's what I thought it was.
a lot of the roots and early formal foundations of reflection can be traced back to the work of John Dewey. So today I'd like to briefly talk about his life, very briefly talk about his life, and then more specifically about the impact of his work in shaping the area of reflective inquiry.
Okay.
Okay, so do you know anything about John Dewey?
Nope, I thought I did, but I don't.
What did you think you knew about John Dewey?
I thought he was the Dewey of the Dewey Decimal System.
Okay.
I thought he was the Dewey from Dewey and Louie.
One of Donald's nephews.
Yes, yeah.
So I'll briefly talk about John Dewey's life first. So John Dewey lived from the year 1859 to 1952.
Okay. 90...
He was about
Something.
97 when he died.
Something like that.
Won't go into that, but
A bit less.
that happened.
Close.
He was an American philosopher and educator, and he was founder of the philosophical movement known as pragmatism.
Ah.
Are you familiar with pragmatism?
No, I've heard of pragmatics.
Yeah, I've heard of being practical.
Okay. One sort of definition of pragmatism is that it broadly prioritized action over doctrine and experience over fixed principles and the practicality of ideas and policies.
Okay.
Practicality of ideas. Okay.
So something we can all get behind.
Yeah.
Dewey's particular version of this was known as Instrumentalism,
Okay.
whereby an inquirer actively introduces specific variations to determine what differences occur in relation to processes and measures how a given event changes in relation to the variations in associated events.
Okay.
So you can already see how this relates to, I guess, action research and reflective practice.
Yeah, I mean that specific description sounds like it could have come from like the hard sciences.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't just he was an educator first and foremost, but he was a very broad writer as far as I know. But I only really know about one area of his work, which I'm going to talk about today. In 1904. After years of working in philosophy departments in various other universities, I think Chicago he was at, one of them, he joined Columbia University in New York, which is a famous teaching college.
Yeah.
Yeah, he spent the majority of his time there, and he wrote a lot of his influential books. So some of his, he wrote a lot of his quite influential work whilst he was at Columbia University, and some of his most famous works include Experience in Nature, the book Experience in Nature from 1925, and How We Think from 1910. And it's this latter book that I'm going to be sort of going into more today. It was in this book that he identified several modes of thought. One in particular was reflection. This was just one of the modes that he talked about. Today I'm going to be referring to an article by Carol Rogers, and she wrote an article in 2002 which defined his original conception of reflection into 4 criteria. She basically made the claim that it's quite hard to establish... So there's a lot of people that are readers of Dewey, as there are with any other philosophers. People read, and they have readers of Dewey as well, and it's very hard to kind of conceptualize what he actually meant.
Right.
So Carol Rogers defines this into 4 criteria, which I'm going to go through today, and then we'll apply it to what we now know about reflection.
Okay.
So the first criteria for Dewey's conception of reflection was reflection as meaning-making process. The process of moving learners from one experience into the next and along a thread of continuity.
So who's doing the reflection there, the teacher or the learners?
I don't think he means learners in the classroom learner, language learner sense.
Okay.
I think he means the student, the learner is in somebody who's on this process.
Right, but it is the learner doing that reflection.
The teacher could be the learner in that case.
Right.
Somebody learning to reflect.
I see.
I think that's what he means, like the inquirer, like he talked about before, the learner. And it's a means to essentially moral ends. So the process of doing the reflection is a means to a moral.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds
We
like
don't need
it's
morality.
It sounds like it's kind of influenced by kind of critical theory.
Yeah.
In the idea that like your research should have some kind of emancipatory goal at the end of it. It should be, or at least it's impossible for it not to be in some way political or agenda driven.
Right.
Yeah. The second criteria was reflection as a systematic, rigorous, and disciplined way of thinking related to scientific inquiry. So we wanted to really kind of lay out, not kind of reflection as being a haphazard thing, but actually kind of quantifying what true reflection is and differentiating it from other kinds of thought,
Okay.
which I'll go into a bit later.
Do you think he meant in terms of quantifying it or in terms of the process, like
I think he wanted
structure
to.
to the
I think
process,
he
how it's
probably
done.
wanted to standardise the process
Right.
for like years to come, obviously, and set it in stone. Number 3, reflection is a community practice, so the interaction with others. Fairly self-explanatory.
Yep.
And number 4, reflection as the valuing of personal and intellectual growth of oneself, a set of attitudes. So we'll go a little bit into each of those. So relating to the first criteria, to education, Dewey said in 1916 that education should give individuals a personal interest in social relationships and control, and the habits of mind which secure social changes without introducing disorder.
So again, we've got an agenda behind the act of education, I guess. It's towards some kind of social improvement in his conception.
Yeah. And Carol Rogers actually wrote that for Dewey, education was kind of a verb. Rather than a noun, he used education as a verb.
That's to educate is the verb.
Yeah, there is a verb already.
I think conceptually he felt education as a doing thing. You're enacting change
Right.
in a positive way.
Okay. So he would argue against kind of acquiring knowledge just for the sake of knowledge.
I believe so. Yeah. I think maybe he's looking more at the bigger picture of what education should be,
Right.
or the end. What should be the end results of education?
Right.
Like structured formal education.
Yeah, I imagine so. Rather than, like you say, just for the sake of learning, there should be an end goal to the education or educationing.
But that goal should be a kind of a moral, societal goal rather than a personal, getting a good job goal.
Yeah, so he talks about there's a thing about morals later, which kind of leads into, I think.
Okay.
But so for Dewey, education forms a link between experience and interaction, with change not only encountered by oneself but also in the environment as a result. So it has some outward effect on your immediate environment, which could again be related to the classroom or to the wider social setting, I guess. However, he also made distinctions between educative and miseducative experiences.
What? I mean, the distinction seems quite obvious, but is there an example?
He used the word distortion, like distorting growth.
Okay.
So this would be...
Some educative experiences could be the wrong kind of educative.
So maybe something from the realm of something from our field would be learning about like an activity or a method or a theory that has subsequently been disproven, but learning about it as if it was still a current thing. Something like that? Would that be a miseducation?
I think so, and like learning it well.
Right.
and getting good at it for the sake for no real sake
Okay.
or the wrong
For the wrong reasons.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or just for the wrong outcome.
Yeah,
Okay.
perhaps, yeah. On reflective thinking, he believed that this shouldn't and fundamentally isn't haphazard, like I said before. He highlighted 3 kinds of thoughts other than reflection. So he talked about stream of consciousness, invention, and belief. And he said that reflection is fundamentally different from these kinds of things. Like teacher beliefs,
Yeah.
teacher invention, in any sense of the word.
When he says they're fundamentally different, is he denying any connection between them, or is he just saying they're different processes?
Yeah, I think for him this forms one part of the process.
Right, okay.
A very minute part of that process,
Yeah.
which is what he means by sort of standardising the reflective process.
Yeah, because obviously your reflection influences your beliefs.
Yeah.
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 Otherwise, what's the point?
Well,
of doing
exactly, yeah. So for Dewey, reflection is the consideration of any belief or supposed form of knowledge in the light of grounds that support it and the further conclusions to which it lends.
it?
And it's the persistent questioning of this. That was what it was for him. He also talked about an impulse to reflect is generated by the potential significance of encounters.
Can I ask so this continuous reflection, does it deny there ever being an end point? Because I was just wondering if there's some kind of analogue to the natural sciences there kind of is an end point in a sense.
Is there?
Well, I mean, not in terms of, we'll never know everything, but in terms of inquiry into a specific question, there can be an end point, right? You can prove something pretty much conclusively in certain areas. I mean, obviously in our field, there probably isn't an end point in that sense, but I was just wondering if he denies that in all cases.
I think fundamentally it would come down to so he talks about the different attitudes that reflectively ready teachers should have. And there's 4. There's wholeheartedness, directness, open-mindedness, and responsibility. And he said that to have a kind of an equilibrium of all these 4 makes you a reflectively ready teacher.
Right.
So I don't think there's an end point. I think it's, if you're by nature a reflective person, you're always going to continue looking for that kind of...
You're talking about in connection with a specific point of inquiry.
Yes, yeah. I think obviously as a teacher you never stop developing or growing or changing.
I don't know. I mean, but to answer your question, I imagine there wouldn't be an end point. Regardless, I mean, in our field at least.
Right, yeah, no, in our field. But I was just wondering, because this seems to be a general philosophical principle, and I was wondering how, if this was something that he applied to everything, in which case I could see some things being questionable.
Sure.
Well, I mean, but thinking forward to how reflection is used in our profession now, it's kind of used within the action research loop. And it's a part of that loop. But people have argued that this loop just continues. It continues going up or down or getting bigger.
Right. It's more like a spring.
That's how it's conceptualized now.
Yeah.
That spiral.
As a continuing thing. So I think in that case, it is always continuing.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting though, when if you talk about action research, is the key, well, one of the key stages, I guess they're all important stages, is the reflection itself. And I think that's the stage that most teachers don't know how to do well, basically.
Yeah. So something I wanted to go back to is how he conceptualized the process of reflection, because he doesn't want it to be a haphazard thing. We didn't want it to be a haphazard thing. So he said that it should begin with having an experience, as we now know or call a critical incident. That's one. Sometimes, not always, but that's one conception that we now know of. That leads to spontaneous interpretation, which is where I think he talked about beliefs in invention and stream of consciousness, is that point, that spontaneous interpretation of what happens, what just happened, kind of thing. And then he moves into naming the problem, trying to tie down what actually happened, generating possible explanations or questions, ramifying explanations, and then finally experimentation.
Okay.
So he wrote this down back in the early 1900s. This is still what we do today, right? Pretty much.
More or less.
It hasn't really changed much.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is kind of foundational, and different models will put emphasis on different parts.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the ramifying stage, which, I mean, that seems the one that people might need the most help with.
Yeah, I think so.
In a sense, because I mean, that just comes down to kind of how perceptive you are, how, you know, and also it has to build on your previous experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, people can quite easily ramify the wrong beliefs.
Right.
Yeah,
That's where
yeah.
the miseducation comes in, maybe.
Right.
Yeah. So we talked about certain attitudes that reflective, ready teachers should have, and one of them is wholeheartedness.
Yeah, that one was
What
interesting.
does that mean?
Just go for it, I guess.
Basically,
Do it.
Get involved.
So wholeheartedness refers to an enthusiasm about a subject matter and a threefold understanding of the subject matter. So, for example, teaching contents of English, understanding about the teaching contents, the learner's learning of English, having an understanding of that, and also how teaching affects students' learning. So kind of understanding that dynamic, basically, that kind of thing. Directness refers to genuineness. What does that mean? And the attitude of trust in the validity of one's own experience without worrying about the judgment of others. And this made me think of the validity of one's own experience. That made me think of like autoethnographies.
Right.
Having trust in your own, as being a valid voice or discourse, basically.
Yeah.
Questions that a teacher who has the attitude of directness may ask are, where was the learning in today's class, rather than what did I teach today?
Okay.
So that whole idea of finding out what did they actually learn rather than what did I teach, thinking about it from that way around, kind of reflective questions in that way.
Yeah.
With open-mindedness, Dewey talks about one's hospitality to new ways of seeing and understanding, or a willingness to entertain different perspectives, which a lot of us aren't willing to do in various different discourses.
I think everyone's unwilling
Yeah.
to a certain extent.
But I like that idea of one's hospitality to new ways of seeing. That's quite a nice term they use. And finally, responsibility grounds all of these attitudes and asks the questions about what are the real implications of what I'm thinking and doing. Basically, so what? That kind of question, basically, So if all of these are right, then you are a reflectively ready teacher, basically.
It calls to mind a little bit the concept of critical thinking, which gets thrown around a lot. And I think it's another one of those things where people know it as a good thing, but aren't that, or less capable of actually applying it.
Yeah, and some people who think they're really good at it are actually not very good at it.
Yeah, basically.
In both cases.
yeah, probably.
Yeah, so that's a little bit about John Dewey's life, and I think for the most part, a lot of what he talked about back in the early 20th century still stands today, and it's been more heavily applied to English language teaching. I think like the work of Thomas Farrell, for example. Yeah. There's another quote that I was going to put in here by a guy called Pennington. It was like, and he doesn't really talk about this, but teachers must have the want. Teachers must have the need to want to change. Okay. Does that make sense? So you can be reflective and you can think about these things that happen in your classroom. But if you don't really have a desire to really make change, then you're not a reflective teacher.
Yeah, it's actually something I was thinking of talking about in a future episode. That I feel like I'm becoming more satisfied with good enough in my lessons sometimes. And I wasn't sure. I'm wondering if it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's reflect on that elsewhere.
Yes.
So that's today's TEFL pioneer, John Dewey.
The TEFLologists have written a book, Podcasting and Professional Development, a guide for English language teachers, details the emergence of the podcast as a tool for professional development, engagement, and personal investment, as well as providing a guide to setting up your own podcast. Featuring a foreword by Thomas Farrell, this is the first book written for language teachers hoping to make connections between the podcasting medium and their own professional development. Podcasting and Professional Development, a guide for English language teachers, is released by the independent publishing collective The Round, which has produced ebooks by Scott Thornbury, Nikki Hockley, Lindsay Clanfield, and many others. For a full list of titles, visit theround.com. Podcasting and Professional Development, a guide for English language teachers, is available on The Round and directly through Amazon, and all profits from sales will go back into producing the TEFLology Podcast. Pick up a copy and support the show.
TEFL cultures.
Today's TEFL culture is collaborative writing. So a lot of the information that I'll be presenting today comes from a book called Collaborative Writing in L2 Classrooms by, I think it's Naomi Storch. And this is a book that I've been reading because it's been quite useful for a project that I'm working on, which I might talk about in January. There's a very specific time frame on that.
Look forward to that.
Yeah. So collaborative writing, when I say that, what kind of tasks come into your mind?
Like story writing, creating a narrative together, diary writing.
Yeah.
Could be like peer editing, you know?
Research editing. Yeah, research presentations, writing a presentation together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so there's obviously quite a range. So in the book, there's a table summarising some different research that's been done into collaborative writing. Here are a few of the different types of tasks that are included under that heading. So substitution exercises, description, dictogloss, jigsaw, text reconstruction, editing, peer editing, data commentary. I'm not sure exactly what that means. And essay writing. So quite a lot of different types of tasks. So obviously collaborative writing is learners working together. And what do you think might be some of the benefits of collaborative writing for learners?
They get the chance to give feedback to one another.
Yeah.
In English, presumably, or that's a skill, I guess, giving feedback, being critical.
Yeah.
With one another. Editing is a skill, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they interact with each other, presumably.
Yeah.
Spoken interactions.
Yes.
And maybe they can also balance out each other's, weaknesses.
It's probably good. It's probably good as a learning tool as well, because they have some kind of pressure from each other to get
like a study tool.
Get the work done, basically.
Right. Yeah. So there are a few different benefits. The first of them is languaging. Right. So are you familiar with languaging?
I've heard it. I've heard of this.
Yeah. What do you think it means?
Trying to remember.
Surely it just means interacting with one another in a language that's not their L1.
No, it's not that. How would you describe it? Or how?
Yeah, I don't remember.
So, languaging is basically, in terms of I guess interactive languaging. It's talking about language, so it's kind of metalinguistic talk, which helps you to restructure your internal language. You can also have individual languaging, which is like when a learner is kind of talking to themselves and correcting themselves. So in the book, Storch looks at several different examples of language-related episodes, or LREs, which occur during collaborative writing. And these are cases where the students, in order to do the writing together, they have to discuss the language that they're using, which helps them collaboratively to achieve a higher level of production, I guess, than either of them would be able to achieve on their own. Yeah.
I see.
ZPD.
Yes, yeah.
And the languaging thing comes from Vygotsky.
Yes,
Right.
I think so. Yeah.
That's just reminded me of a presentation I went to, a task-based learning presentation, where the guy basically, they were all using the same computer, these students, but the teacher was videoing their mouse movements and their comments to each other. So he was basically videoing what he could see on the screen, and that was kind of languaging. You could see them deleting stuff, commenting on stuff. You could see their mistakes being made and corrected, and their conversations.
Right.
I think that's languaging, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Was it's a different form of languaging, a sort of technology focused kind of thing.
Are we talking about verb? This isn't just verbal though, right?
Well, these
is
particular
right,
examples are verbal,
Okay,
but yeah, there is some stuff about that coming up.
Good.
So let's have a look at some examples of language-related episodes. So you have here a form-based language-related episode, so obviously connected to grammar. Why don't you two read through it? So we've got Olivia and Shirley.
I'm Shirley.
I know you are.
Surely.
So can you read through that and then discuss what you think is happening there?
Okay. Figure 3 shows that there were Vietnamese and Laotians
Participating
participating.
is correct.
Because there were. We are using there were.
And I was trying to sound incredulous when I said is correct, apparently, but I didn't actually read that bit.
It should have come before.
Is
a lot.
correct.
Yeah. So what do you think was going on there?
Well, I think they were negotiating what's the correct form for that word to take. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, one corrected the other,
Correct?
and then they
Is that
kind
correct?
of... Yeah, and they both checked. It was like...
Right, they
Yeah.
mirror. Yeah, they what's the word when you back channel? Is that the correct term?
Not sure, but
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, exactly. They're using feedback from each other to negotiate towards a more correct form of what they're trying to write, which then apparently the learners incorporated into subsequent utterances.
Yeah.
Yeah. The next one's in French, so we'll skip that. So that was an example of a form-based one. There's also a lexis-based one, so a word meaning. So here we've got Nabil and Knife. So
I'll be naive.
Oh yeah. Okay. Any exercising?
Leish exercising.
Tamarine.
Exercise tamarine.
Yeah.
so what's happened there?
Well, they're using their L1. They're kind of code switching. They're using a bit of
Code-switching,
both to negotiate the meaning of the word that
think-
one of them doesn't.
Yeah, he
know
said
the meaning
he
of.
said leash, and then the other student asked
Right.
tamarine. Is that the language?
So we should point out that leash is translated as what do you mean? So he said, what do you mean exercising? And instead of saying what do you mean in English,
So-
he said.
It's
that
kind of
phrase
working on
in
two
Arabic.
levels. He's asked a question in his own language,
Yeah.
presumably, and then the other student said, "Is that a question you're asking me in tamarine?" That's how.
No,
I-
tamarine is the Arabic word for exercise. So he's giving him the
okay,
translation
not
of the word.
I was thinking of tamarin. You know the
Right,
Sri
right,
Lankan.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Basically, he said one of them said exercise, and the other said in Arabic, "Well, how do you say exercise? What does exercise mean?"
Okay.
And then he answered
But
in
I
Arabic.
think there's code switching, right? That's the,
Yes,
that's
yeah,
the
yeah.
Is that the main point?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. So we've got a few other examples, so mechanical ones, discourse-focused language-related episodes, and also incorrectly resolved ones, so where they muck it up, basically.
Yeah.
So language-related episodes are one, and languaging, are one kind of benefit of collaborative writing. Is this something you've seen in your own classrooms?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's obviously it's not exclusive to collaborative writing.
Right.
It hopefully happens in any spoken interaction in the classroom.
Yeah.
That you allow for those types of LREs.
How do you think there might be an additional benefit to doing it in a writing task as opposed to a speaking task? Or to encountering this in a writing area?
Right.
There's a record of it. I mean,
Yeah, well, I mean, all those interactions were spoken though.
But they're working on a text.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But you wouldn't. That text doesn't necessarily reflect all the negotiation that arrived at.
Not all the negotiation, but it reflects the final product.
Yeah.
So you have a product which you can go back at and look at. Yeah.
Yeah.
some of my students did a presentation on Google Slides together, and you can see their comments to each other. And it was all I insisted that it all be in English, and they did. And they have these kinds of interactions, but there's a record of it. So there's obviously a clear learning thread, I guess, from.
Right. If you have a record of all this.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess also a writing task is, I don't know how to describe it sort of technically, but it's a more kind of solid task than a speaking task.
Right. Yeah.
You know, students if they're taking part in a speaking task, like a discussion or a debate or whatever, they probably will negotiate meaning sometimes. But the speaking itself is the task. And then when they have this kind of extra thing to construct, maybe they have something, they have more to talk about,
Right.
in a sense.
Yeah.
More languaging to do.
Yeah, and so apparently there is evidence that this kind of languaging leads to better uptake than the spoken forms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. But
So
those are all spoken forms.
right, but doing it in a writing task
Right.
leads to than if you're doing it in a speaking
Yeah.
task is what I mean.
Yeah.
So languaging is one area where collaborative writing's quite useful. Also, sort of feedback and scaffolding, which you already talked about. But it depends. It depends what kind of tasks you're doing. So how do you think different task types? We talked about different task types earlier. How do you think that would affect the language that people are using? So if you've got things like dictogloss, text reconstruction, essay writing, and more mechanical things, how do you think that would change the nature of the interaction?
Hopefully. I mean, it depends what the outcome of the class is, right? Because if it's a writing class, maybe accuracy would be improved or developed.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. But like if it's a content-based class, they're obviously learning from each other. They can sort of draw upon more resources if they're talking to one another.
Yeah.
So maybe content and accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of anything?
I mean, in a dictogloss, as we spoke about, the input that's provided usually by the teacher could have a specific target language that the teacher wants the students to practice.
Yeah.
I think even within that, there would still be that kind of languaging. That would, when as students are negotiating or trying to figure out what is said, they would still have to take part in those kinds of interactions.
Yeah.
But there might be a stronger emphasis on one particular structure.
Do you think there's ever been a case where you've set a task for the students to write an essay together, but you're not actually assessing the essay, you're assessing their languaging with each other? Do you think that's a possible approach to... I want you guys to write an essay together about this topic, okay, blah, 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 but you're actually seeing how they interact with one another.
I don't think it's an ethical approach.
No, but yeah, I'm wondering if that's ever been...
What kind of criteria would you have for that sort of assessment?
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, yeah, I mean, I guess if you pre-taught this kind of language, like what does this mean, or how do you say this word, then it kind of has a functional element to it, right?
But with all that kind of negotiating language, it depends on the number of opportunities to use it that come up.
Yeah.
In certain cases it'll come up a lot, in other cases it won't.
I mean, I guess you could present a task to the students, like you need to work out how to talk about this thing together, and then I'm going to assess how you do it with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
That would be ethical.
Yeah, if you tell them what you're doing, then it's ethical. Yeah. It's just if you trick them, like getting them to do one thing and then testing something else.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So in the classroom, those are some of the kind of benefits. Do you think there are any other kind of non-language related benefits to this kind of activity?
I mean, some people are better at working with others than others.
Sure.
And maybe the ones who don't have much practice of it, just the act of doing it will improve them, will help them get better at doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about something a bit kind of broader, sort of group level, class level?
Well, I was going to say that for some it could be quite face-threatening to have this kind of interaction with peers.
Right.
And be told that, no, this is no, not always, but if you make a mistake and somebody corrects you, that can be quite face-threatening in certain contexts.
I guess potentially both positive and negative effects on the group dynamics in the classroom.
Yeah.
Having said that, I imagine the effects would be more likely positive than negative.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's what the research seems to suggest, according to Storch. So there's a few different kind of effects, mostly positive, maybe, as you say, a couple of negative effects. And you mentioned earlier the computer-mediated kind of collaborative writing. And there are actually, there's a whole chapter in here about computer-mediated collaborative writing. So one topic is wikis. So what do you imagine that would be, wikis in L2 classes?
They're like entries about a topic. They're like Wikipedia, right? Where anyone can edit to an extent and but you can edit each other freely without any kind of judgment.
Yeah.
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 Well, there may be judgment. I don't know.
It's a non-judgmental act, but you will be judged.
Huh, yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. What do you think about doing that kind of project?
Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, I've used wikis with fellow teachers to collaborate on tasks and projects, and it is an interesting way to collaborate. I mean, you can when somebody makes an edit, you can see the edit they've made.
Yeah.
Which helps, I think, rather than just not knowing what's happened.
Yeah. So there's a few different kind of benefits to doing both kinds of collaborative writing. Do you think there are any pitfalls of doing collaborative writing, or things you'd have to watch out for?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, one of the members of the pair or group, whatever, dominating.
Right.
Yeah.
Dominating or being forced to do all the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Example,
Which
yeah.
is a slightly different thing.
Sure. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's always the case. Like in group, when you're assessing groups, I think learners want to know: are you assessing me personally or our group? And they kind of want to know what their position in it all is. And if they have a lot of their work edited, maybe they're worried that it's not going to be fully shown. But also, like, there should be an account of all this. So the process should be documented.
Right.
But
Is that always possible?
Not always possible, but there should be some sort of documentation of who did what and when and
Right.
kind of.
If you're doing a wiki, I guess that's quite easy. 'Cause
Yeah,
you've
yeah,
got
yeah,
like the who edited what button.
Yeah.
So another topic that Storch mentions is resistance from students. For example, they may feel that doing collaborative writing goes against their kind of commonly understood pedagogical experiences. So they're used to being taught in a certain way, and they may not appreciate having to do this kind of task. So I think this is an interesting topic. It's something that I've been trying with my students a little bit. As I mentioned, it's part of a project I'm working on. And it seems like it does lead to them kind of thinking about language and being able to share their language level through this collaborative process, which I think is quite a positive thing.
Yeah, I've done mainly focused on peer editing of written work for high school students. But maybe one of the first few times I did it, it was just, okay, now you're gonna swap papers and you're gonna leave comments on each other's things you liked, things that you think maybe are wrong, that kind of stuff, and then give it back and they make changes. But the last few times I did it, I told them that the final product would be basically a co-production.
Right.
Both their names will be on it, and they're both responsible for the final version. And that had a big change in terms of the type of feedback that the peers gave.
Right. So I think there are definitely a few things to look out for. But yeah, I think this is something that's kind of underexplored. There have been obviously some studies, but this book, which is Collaborative Writing in L2 Classrooms, is apparently the first sort of book-length discussion of this topic, and it summarises a lot of that research. So, I think if you're interested in this topic, pick it up. And that's this week's TEFL Culture, all about collaborative writing. TEFL News.
For this episode's TEFL News, this is a news story I found on a website called Engadget.
Okay.
You know Engadget?
No.
This is from the 4th of October of this year, so just a few weeks ago, as we're recording. And the title is Google's Pixel Buds Will Change the World. You familiar with Google's Pixel Buds?
No.
You familiar with the Google Pixel?
No.
So it's Google's smartphone, basically.
Right. I didn't even know they had one.
Okay.
So we're not talking about actual pixels. We're talking
no.
about
It's just the name that Google's given to its smartphone. They just last month released the Pixel 2. They had a big event to release the Pixel 2, which is
I've heard the first one.
the second version of their smartphone. I don't think it was very successful.
It must be a very tiny little pixel.
No, it's not. That's not what the name refers to, I don't think.
Does it refer to the number of pixels on the screen? That it is made of pixels?
It definitely, I think it uses pixels.
Two
Okay.
pixels.
Yeah.
It's awful.
So in the same event when they announced the Pixel 2 smartphone, they also announced right at the end the Google Pixel Buds, which are...
Are they earbuds?
They are. They're wireless
Okay,
they're
right,
earbuds.
okay.
Well, actually, they're not wireless. They're two earbuds connected to each other by a wire.
Like around the back of the head?
Yeah, some
Okay.
people call them neck buds, but that's a disgusting term that we should use. Yeah, so Apple has its new earbuds.
Yeah.
Is that what they're called?
Airbuds.
Is that a movie about a
Yeah.
basketball playing dog? And those just hang out in your ear and look silly.
Yeah.
And these look silly as well because you've got this cord draped.
Well,
on
I
the
saw
back of your
one of my
neck.
students was wearing his
Yeah, I've seen a few.
the other day, and when the lesson started, I didn't think to check if he'd removed them or not.
Okay.
So I wasn't sure if he was still wearing them throughout the class.
All right.
He was laughing a lot at what? I think he was listening to something.
Okay.
I don't know.
Maybe our
It
podcast.
wasn't me. Yeah.
Wasn't that?
So what the Google Pixel Buds, the Pixel Buds are basically wireless earphones.
Okay.
They sync up with your Pixel 2 smartphone, obviously. But what it does is it allows you to do all the things that Google Assistant will do, which is basically like a Siri or
Right.
one of those things that you talk to and it'll answer
Okay.
your questions. You tap on the side of one of the buds, ask it to give you directions somewhere, play a song, etc. However,
Pixel Bud, play me a song.
Yeah, do you have to sort of
Basically.
say, like in Japan it's Hello Google. I think in the UK it's Alexa, it's called.
Alexa, right?
Which is a lot more sexy than Hello Google.
Tap, tap. Hello, Google. Play me a song.
Anything will do.
Yeah. You know me. You know my browsing history.
Yeah.
But something you can do with the Pixel Buds that you cannot do with the Apple AirBuds is you can tap on it and you can say, "I'd like to, help me speak Japanese," for example.
Ah, right, okay.
And what it'll then do is you can hand your smartphone to somebody. For example, somebody who speaks only Japanese and not English. And if you're a person who speaks only English and not Japanese, you can start speaking in English. And what will come out the speaker of the smartphone will be the translation,
Okay.
the Japanese translation. And then obviously the person can speak Japanese to your phone and you'll hear the English.
Right.
You can do that without these though, right? You can just listen to your phone.
What do you mean?
Like you can talk into your phone, then your phone can tell you back what they've just said. Like you don't need the headphones aren't intrinsic to.
No.
You're talking about it's going into your head. You're hearing it without them hearing what.
Yeah, I guess that's part of it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they wouldn't, and they only hear the English anyway.
Yeah.
So I'll talk a little bit. There have been things that it's obviously been automatic computer translation for a while.
Okay. Yeah.
But maybe what makes this a little bit different. So about apparently 20 years ago, do you remember Alta Vista?
Yeah.
Early days of the internet. In 1997, they launched their Babelfish.
Yeah. Babelfish.
Babelfish.
Babel.
It's Babel.
It's whatever you want it to be.
No, it's Babel.
Okay.
That's the correct answer to that.
All right.
It is Babel.
All right.
You never read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? It's Babel.
All right.
We all know where he
It
lives.
refers to the Tower of...
Tower. He lives
Babel.
up in
Obviously.
the up at Babel. I used to say Babelfish when I was doing my French GCSE. I often.
Yeah, some of my friends did because they said,
Babel.
because you babble, don't you? When you talk, you babble. It's like, yeah, that's two B's. It's a Babelfish.
Yeah, it's pronounced differently in different variations
No,
of
the
English.
Babelfish is Babelfish. It's from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and it's called a Babelfish.
Do you think that the Babelfish has ever had to translate?
Yeah, do you think if an American
It
was
was
wearing
a-
a Babel or a Babelfish, would they hear it as Babel or Babel?
I think they'd hear it as Babel because it would be correct. That would be the correct answer.
It's not
Okay.
even a fish, is it? Really, it's like a computer program.
No, it's a fish
No,
in
it's a
the
well,
in
it's
the
a
book. It's a
alien.
fish.
I guess that looks like a fish.
Yeah, it is a fish.
Okay.
It's a fish. That's the correct answer.
Okay.
Yeah, but I do remember.
So anyway, Alta Vista's automatic translation
Alta Vista.
software. It had a dozen languages, but basically just didn't work that well, as you'd imagine.
Yeah, yeah.
The technology wasn't there. The processing power wasn't there. The translations came out as Babel.
Right. Nice.
In 2015, Skype debuted its live translation feature, which has 4 languages for spoken audio, 50 languages for written using IM. But the translations aren't really in real time, so there's still a significant lag between providing the original language and the output in the target language.
Right.
Earlier this year, Microsoft had its PowerPoint presentation translator.
Okay.
Have you heard about that?
No.
You can do it with an iOS or Android app, and basically while you're doing a PowerPoint, it will convert your voice into at the moment just Spanish or Chinese.
Right.
In real time. So if you're delivering your talk to a Spanish audience, you can speak in English and it'll translate it into Spanish.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know why if you have to be doing PowerPoint with it at the same time, but they've linked it to PowerPoint.
Right.
And then last year there's an Indiegogo project called The Pilot from somebody called Waverly Labs.
Okay.
Maybe they're big in the tech world, I'm not sure. And they said that they had, they were trying to do a similar thing, speech recognition, machine translation with wearable technology, but apparently it just hasn't worked yet. They haven't been able to deliver it. But apparently they've done it, or they claim to have done it.
Right.
They've cracked it.
Yeah. This article talks at length about how Google has cracked it and how they're doing it. I couldn't find any actual demonstrations of it. I don't know if it's actually been released yet. But the idea is that you can just talk to anybody, basically real time. I think that's the key issue here.
Yeah, I don't know. My kind of skeptical issue with this kind of thing is even if it's in real time or as close as. I don't think it can be in real time, and I think there is something about language use that is kind of immediate. And even if it's a split second lag, it's always going to be there. I don't know.
It's immediate and it's personal and it's unreal. Like it removes the human element from language or languaging.
Well, it's like there's a middleman between you and the other. I mean, it's not like it's like in Star Trek. When they've got the universal translator, but like when they actually speak, somehow it also rearranges their mouth to be speaking the language that they're speaking. So it's not like when the aliens speak, they're speaking English and their mouth is speaking English, right? It's not just the sounds that are changed, and that's the problem. I think if we were talking now. Your mouth, and you were speaking a different language, we were translating it, your mouth would be doing one thing and I'd be hearing something else, and it would be a bit weird,
There's lag time. And I don't think it's completely... I think now when these technologies get up to full speed and full spec, I think there needs to be, tens of years of discourse analysis of these interactions to fully understand, are these a good thing or not?
Well, I
think
whether or not they're a good thing or not is if people actually use them and feel like they're using them effectively.
I guess there needs to be more. There needs to be more like a corpus of this kind of spoken interaction. I wonder if there is.
I don't know if there needs. I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah.
But in terms of as a product, if it's successful, it'll just depend if when people try it out, they feel like they've had a successful interaction.
I've never actually seen this being used around Tokyo.
So I think one issue is obviously there's always going to be a lag because it has to wait till you finish your sentence, to be able to translate it.
Yeah, but even if it was immediate, I still think that there would be something wrong there. Like if you watch a video on the internet and sometimes the sound is slightly out of sync, it's really distracting.
Watch it.
Yeah. So I think it would be the same kind of thing.
Okay, so I guess the main...
It would work on the phone. The phone would work.
Yeah.
It would make call centres much easier because you wouldn't have to put them in English-speaking countries. It'd be anywhere.
Right. Yeah, so I guess the other issue is, could it ever fully translate everything? I guess that's always been the big issue with this kind of machine translation. How would it work with jokes, for example, or wordplay or that kind of thing?
I think there needs to be, a set of guidelines as to when and where these can be used and can't be used.
Huh.
Well, but who would be so stupid as to kind of say... tell a joke and I don't know. There needs to be.
Well, that might be part of it. If it does become successful, people will eventually learn how to. They wouldn't talk the same way using this translation as they would with somebody who they share an L1 with.
So do you think that?
But you don't do that in your second language anyway.
Right.
So this technology was created to bridge the gap between two people, kind of in very quick interactions, wanting to convey a message to each other.
What I imagine the main goal for all this is for business interactions
or tourism or that kind
tourism.
of
yeah.
So
basically, I don't think we're in trouble yet. Is the point? In our jobs, I think we're okay.
But do you think if there was a workable version of it,
again,
So you could go to a foreign country, you could order, stuff in a restaurant, you could ask, in a shop, you could go up and ask them anything you want. Can I try this on? Where's the nearest hospital? Whatever.
But I think you can
and for all those kind of interactions, you would be safe in the knowledge that you could get through those.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it will have some kind of effect on those kinds of interactions, but I think there's always going to be, differences between this kind of technology and actual face-to-face speech.
Yeah.
And I think people are going to still, there are parts of actual face-to-face speech that people are going to desire, which the technology isn't going to be able to fulfill, is my guess.
Also, it's kind of fun to try out a few words here and there. It's kind of takes the romanticism out of this kind of...
But my point is, if it's successful at a certain level, is it not then possible that countries that have a certain policy about English language learning, for example, everybody has to learn English, might relax that policy?
Sure.
Yeah, that could be one.
Would that be a bad thing?
No. Well, probably not. But then there would be an impact on our industry.
Yeah.
But I don't think learning a language, the end result is not always about learning more words or learning how to interact. There's other bits along the way that people kind of like.
Of course, regardless, there's always going to be some people who want to learn to speak English without the use of machine translation. But the point is that there's a lot of people who would be happy to rely on a machine translation without the pain of going through decades of learning English.
Yeah, I mean, it's analogous to translations of books, right? Like, you can read most books in English translations, but, people are always going to want to learn the second language to read the original because it's not exactly the same.
Right, but how many people do that?
Me.
Very few.
Not even me.
Yeah, very few.
So next week we're going to do this in Czech, and they can translate it on the other side?
Yeah. Well, it'll be one of those double translations.
By the time
we'll see. That's how you test how accurate it is. Right?
Yeah. True.
The speed that technology is moving. Next week will be the last episode of the TEFLology Podcast.
It'll just be an algorithm. There'll still be episodes, but we won't have anything to do with it. Okay, that was this episode's TEFL News: The Rise of the Machines.
Thank you very much for listening today.
And if you'd like to get in contact with us, you can send an email to teflology@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter @TEFLology. You can like our Facebook page, which is just the TEFLology Podcast on Facebook. And we also have a website, which is www.teflology-podcast.com. You can also go to our website, www.teflology-podcast.com, which contains links to all of our episodes and our reasonably priced ebook. So it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Goodbye.